want to talk to you a little bit this evening about winter crappie fishing. Now, fishing's like everything else. You have all kind of opinions and ideas. And what I'm talking to you about this evening are some of my opinions and my ideas about crappie fishing. Are you interested in fishing for winter crappie? Well, if you are, there's some things you need to understand. One is this: they're not as aggressive in the winter as they are in the spring. When they're spawning, when they bite your hook, you know it's been hit. It'll be a thump. But in the wintertime, they're a little bit slower in what they do. The water cools down, the metabolism slows down. And when they bite, the bite's a whole lot softer. I know the last few I caught at Lake Norman, I've been fishing several times at Lake Norman lately. And I know at Norman, when I got the bites, normally they were real soft bites. In fact, 2 or 3 of them, I didn't even know they were on, had it in their mouth, until I pulled a little bit on the line and the hook set. Then I pulled them into the boat. Now, I know it's cold in the wintertime, but just pick a day when the temperature is not down in the 20s, maybe above 30, and then it'll get up maybe 50. Just pick your days if you don't like the cold, but most of you will sit out deer hunting in cold temperatures. So if you can do it for deer hunting, fishing is easier. You moving about fishing. So let me give you some advice, and this is just from my experience. One is avoid going after a hard rain, especially toward where the river comes in to meet the lake. There's a lot of debris floating in the lake, and you'll have to dodge debris. You may do damage to your boat motor, to the foot, or you may mess up a propeller. And those things, even for my 50 horsepower Honda, they run like about $100 a piece, or a little better, $100, $130. So my Honda mechanic advised me to keep an aluminum prop on there. He said you can buy good many props for what you'll pay to repair or replace one foot that gets messed up. So that's what I do, and sometimes it works against me, and I have to order another prop. But if you'll watch it and not go after a hard rain, there won't be nearly as much debris floating in the water. In addition, if there's been a lot of rain, the water will be stained. Now, nothing wrong with a little stain, but it can get sustained that can affect your fishing. It'll not be as productive. Then another thing in the wintertime, especially if you fish by yourself, make sure you wear a life jacket. You never know what would happen. If you're by yourself, you don't have a life jacket on, and that water is in the 40s, even in the upper 50s. You could have hypothermia when you fall into the water, and if the wind's blowing, it could blow the boat away from you before you could get to the boat. So it pays to be careful, to be cautious. Fall out of the boat in the wintertime by yourself could be absolutely disastrous. And then too, I would advise with a life jacket wearing the kind that they're real small. They come around your neck and you have 2 small pieces, one on each side, 2 parts of it, and it doesn't activate till you hit the water. I've seen some videos on YouTube of one guy demonstrated how regular life jackets, if you fell overboard and you were unconscious, you would go forward and you could still drown, even with a life jacket on. But he also demonstrated the inflatable kind, went into the water like he was unconscious, and it put his head right up. So that's the best kind. They're a little bit more expensive than others, but the kind that runs off of CO2 and inflates when he hits the water, that's a good way to go. And then be sure in the wintertime you've got a sensitive rod, and I recommend braided line, because braided line doesn't stretch, it doesn't give. And if you're using braided and that fish bites it, and you've got your thumb or one of your fingers on that rod, touching the rod itself, the rod body, the main part, then when that fish touches it, you're going to know with braided line, which is ultra sensitive. I use most of the time 6 pound, either 4 pound or 6 pound braided line. And if your thumb's on the string or it's on the rod, or on the line rather, you'll know it. when that fish bites. The winter bite is a whole lot smoother and not as aggressive as it is in the spring. So if you have the right line and you're touching either the line or that rod, you can feel a light bite. Some claim the crappie move slower to conserve their energy in the wintertime. I don't know whether that's so or not. Everybody, you're going to find this about fishing. Everybody has their opinion. And then let me say something else. It pays to keep tension on your line. It makes sense to know when you cast, if you're keeping your line fairly tight, if that fish touches it, if the line has a little tension in it, you're going to feel it better. You can feel that winter bite. So you say, how do I do that? You keep your rod up. Try to keep the tip of your rod up the best you can. And then remember, in the wintertime, crappies will tend to travel in schools. You can use your depth finder to find them, either with regular sonar or even with down imaging. On down imaging, they'll show up as little specks, little white or yellowish specks, and you can know those are fish. If you go to brush and you see all those little dots around it, those are fish around that brush. So if you fish brush or open waters where there are no fish, you're wasting your time. But when you use especially the down imaging feature on your depth finder, the fish below show up as different sizes of dots around the brush. Another tip I want to give you is crappies respond to sight, sense, and smell. So it's good to use a fish attractant scent. I use slab sauce a lot of times on mine. Just put a little bit on the jig during the winter when they're reluctant to bite. The slab sauce is a good one. And you can also get these nibbles, these real sensitive smelling nibbles. You can put a nibble on your hook, and a lot of times that scent will attract them as well. Here's another thing about especially winter fishing. Don't give up too soon. They may not bite very good in the morning, but in the afternoon they may turn on. You just never know how that's going to go. They may not bite well in the morning, then turn around and bite well in the afternoon. And then let me say something about your imaging. I never have bought one of the real expensive units that has 800K. I think mine goes to 200. But I can side image with mine. I have a Helix 7 DI, and it has a navigation on it. I also bought a Lake Master chip to put in the depth finder, and it shows me the channels. It shows me the depths of all the water ahead of me. So you don't have to buy the hyper expensive stuff. I know it's better. And the higher, I believe it's megahertz you get in the unit, the clearer everything is. But if you don't want to spend a fortune and still have a good depth finder, a Helix 7 or a Helix 9, the cheaper, of course, is a 7, is a good way to go. And then some advice on using jigs. Now, it's generally accepted that in dark waters and stained water, you use a dark colored jig. And then in unstained waters, you use a light colored jig. I mainly use Bobby Garland's on my weedless jigs, and I do use a weedless jig, especially when I'm casting out and reeling back in, because I don't particularly like getting hung in brush. And most time you find crappies worthless brush. So my favorite colors to use all year long are the baby shad cream, the pink, and chartreuse. And you can mix those. Those are 3 good colors to use. And sometimes they may bite some color that you never imagined they'd bite and go after. So you got to decide whether to cast your jig or whether to do vertical jigging. Now in the wintertime, from what I've experienced and what I've read, going straight down and just barely moving that jig, not enough to scare the fish or start, just barely moving it. Sometimes just holding it still in front of their face, because you know you're going to move some holding that rod. So you have to experiment to see what's working. If one thing doesn't work, if you're going down straight jigging and that's not doing anything, we'll cast it. And a lot of fellas, they're all jigs. They won't use a minnow. If you can't catch them any other way, A lot of times I'll take a few minnows, and I may catch them on the minnows when I can't get them on the jig. In the wintertime, if you jig, don't overwork the jig. Many times when the bite's slow, it pays just kind of hold that jig in front of the fish's face. And then let me reemphasize something I just said. Don't be embarrassed to use minnows. If your jig's not working and you want to catch fish and you have a minnow to fall back on, they might bite a minnow when they won't bite a jig. And I found out one thing about fishing. Everybody has an opinion. That's why it's good to get different opinions from the fellas about catching crappie or whatever fish. There's always more to learn. How do we learn? We learn by doing. We learn by reading. We learn by experimenting. The different techniques and the different presentations you can use. Just keep on fishing, because the more you do it, the more you'll love it. Go after those crappie and catch them. There's nothing like a good, well-prepared, well-cooked crappie fillet. God bless you, and thank you for listening today.